we are taking our first look at the education sector in Nigeria. Now, there was a protest, as mentioned earlier, by the students of UNILAG, and of course, some few students of other universities protesting the hike in tuition fees. But fortunately, the fee has been slashed. Now, that was the second protest in 1 week by the UNILAG students who were joined by other colleagues from other universities. Now, it is well understood that the removal of fuel subsidy has driven prices of things across board very high. But students did demand that the federal government invest the proceeds from the subsidy removal on education rather than allowing any increment in school fees, and that was their major agitation. Now, we're going to be looking at why the fees were even increased at all in the first place and what can be done going forward, regardless of the fact that the fees have been slashed. And also we'll be looking at who gets affected by slashing the fees. Is it the lecturers, is it the students, or is it the education sector at large? Well, joining me to discuss this first topic is my guest in the studio, Philip Olatinwo, a spokesperson, Student Solidarity Group Against Fee Hike. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, Philip, we do understand that the fees have been slashed finally and thankfully after the protests that erupted yesterday. But I would like for us to understand, was it even necessary to increase the fees that high in the first place? I mean, we're talking from 20-something thousand to over 200,000. And what do you think resulted to that?
Oh, thank you for having me. I would like to state that it was uncalled for to increase the fees because the government told us that they need to remove subsidy, and the proceeds from subsidy will be invested in education and infrastructural development. But at the same time, when they remove subsidy, they are taking off the funding of education. And that is why we're saying that it is uncalled for. The timing is wrong. Nigerians are really going through a lot. And the poor people who are already being forced to pay increased fees for transportation and other cost of living cannot be asked to pay more in their universities. And that is why we're saying that it is uncalled for at this time. It is not the proper timing for any increments whatsoever in any university or any higher education institution.
All right, now we understand that the administration spoke so much about prioritizing the education sector. I mean, that's where the student loan bill erupted in the first place. But then looking at these issues logically, right, the fuel subsidy was removed. Do you think it was possible to channel that money straight up to the education sector immediately? Were there no other sectors that should have been prioritized before the education sector?
Okay, thank you for asking. The president addressed the nation about a few weeks ago, and in his address, he said that the government has been able to save about 1.1 trillion naira in less than 2 months after removal of subsidy. And for years now, for almost more than a decade now, Academic Staff Union of Universities members have been on strike. And the genesis of this strike is that the government must fund education. There is an agreement in 2009. And the whole funds that we're talking about here is about 1.3 trillion naira. So if the government can save about 1 trillion naira in less than 2 months from subsidy, then they can easily channel that funds into education. It means that in about 6 months, they will have saved about 3 trillion naira. And that will resolve all the crises that we're having in our universities. So that's why we're saying that education must be a priority for government. But in this country, they are not interested in funding anything. They have taken away the subsidy. People are paying increased prices for transportation and other things in the country. And at the same time, they are taking away the little hope for the poor people, and that is education. They are taking it away by increasing the fees out of the reach of the poor people. And at the same time, they are also increasing the electricity tariff. So what exactly will government be responsible for in this country? If they're saying subsidy must go, it has gone. Education, now they're saying that they can't fund it. So that is why we disagree with the government, that it is inappropriate to cut off the funding of education at this time, as education is a priority of government and it's a fundamental right of government, of people, not a privilege, as they used to put it in public space.
All right. Now, following a meeting with the NANs, right, the prices were slashed. The prices that were increased before were slashed. But looking at the numbers, is that price slash favorable for the students now?
Okay, with respect to the meeting that held between the university administration and the leadership of NANS and some faculty presidents or all the faculty presidents, we are evaluating the reports from this meeting. And a proper thing, the principle of democracy, is that if there is any proposal from anybody at any meeting, you don't agree to take over the discussion from students, because the people that are really affected in all of this are the students. So we have to take the reports or the proposal from the management back to students for them to deliberate whether they are going to approve such proposal or they are going to reject it. So I find it very unprincipled for some individuals to agree on the negotiation table with the management that yes, we agree to a slash of 10,000 for new students, a slash of 20,000 from the obligatory fee for returning students, and 5,000 area from the utility charges. The university management also said that they are going to reinstate the students' union. They did not make that pronouncement at that meeting. The vice chancellor said that yes, the Senate will meet and they will make the pronouncement. And so the proper thing to have been done at that meeting is not to agree or sign any form of agreement with the university authorities. It is to take such proposal to students and ask students to vote whether to approve such proposal or reject such proposal. So we state that that meeting is not democratic because they have agreed to whatever they have pushed to the table, and that does not reflect the interest of students.
Well, now, Philip, we're talking about putting the students into consideration and at least asking them to vote if they're in favor. But I think one thing that we're missing is the lecturers as well. Putting the lecturers into consideration, I mean, looking at the screen there, you see lecturers holding placards saying that no lecturer, no development, and their salaries are so meager, they can't even do anything about it. So if the lecturers should be put into consideration, isn't it only fair that at least some more money be pumped into the sector so that they can at least, earn a decent living? Some of them are even still owed salaries. So putting the lecturers into consideration and, of course, generally running the educational sector, more finance is needed. Isn't that something that we should also consider?
Thank you for saying that. I would like to state clearly that the increment in fee does not affect the payment of salaries of members of staff of the university, because that is still on the government. The federal government still pays salaries of staffs, both academic staff and non-academic staffs. So what we're saying now is that whether you increase, the vice chancellor came out to say, yes, it's sundry charges. We're not talking about tuition fee here. We're talking about sundry charges, cost of library, cost of examination, and other costs like that. So we're not really talking about payments of salaries to staffs of the university. So what we're saying is that despite the increments, it will not translate to end of ASU strike, because the federal government is still owing about 8 months' salary of members of ASU. So it's just very disappointing for some individuals to bring the narrative that yes, it is fees that students are paying that are being used to pay the salaries of lecturers. I can tell you that if we allow this to stand, Academic Staff Union of University can still go on strike. ASU members can still go on strike. It does not translate to the end of the loggerhead between the federal government and the Academic Staff Union of University members. So it has nothing to do completely from the payment of salaries. It has been confirmed the government is still the one paying the personnel charges and the cost and the overhead charges of the university. So all of these fees that we're paying are just sundry charges. It's going to fall under the internally generated revenue of the university. So it has nothing to do with payment of salaries. It will not translate to any increment in the salaries of staff. And I need to state clearly also that this increment is not also just affecting students. It's also affecting staffs, because some staff members are paying fees of some students that are indigent students that cannot afford the 21,000 that were being paid at some point. So these individuals cannot afford it again, because as we speak now, the highest paid professor in the university gets 500,000 naira. So with time, what they are trying to say, and other non-academic staffs and other senior staffs cannot even afford to pay these fees. So what we are trying to say now is that with time, they are going to get this education out of the reach of even the staffs. So it is not a personal issue of students. It's also an issue that affects staff members, and it's just like making it look like a factory workers that produce a lot of things, but they cannot afford to purchase what they are producing. So with time, University of Lagos staff will not be able to send their kids to the university where they work and where they contribute all their experience and all their academic prowess.
All right, thank you so much, Philip, for that. And we're really hoping that it doesn't degenerate to that level. And thanks also for that clarification. Now, we do have our correspondent, Aisha Adebayo, in the University of Lagos to tell us what the mood is like, whether or not the dust has settled. We'll be joining her very shortly while we're still having this conversation. But in the meantime, like we said, it's a youth-based program and we want to hear from the youth. So we're going to head over to Twitter now to see what people are saying about tuition fees in UNILAG especially, and how the reduction or removal of fuel subsidy has affected the education sector in general. Let's take a look at some tweets. Now, Imran Rashid says, my thoughts are with the UNILAG students about their school fees hike and the protest. Another one says, too bad for government schools to increase fees astronomically. Another one says, most of those are in authority. I don't think we have our tweets ready just yet. So we're going to come back to this conversation now. Phillips, thank you for still staying with us. Now, the main question remains, now that the fees have been slashed, has the dust settled, or the students are still trying to gather arsenal to protest further?
Okay, as I've said earlier, I said it's unprincipled for those who attended that meeting. We boycotted that meeting because we knew that that was the game plan of the university authorities, that they just want to force student leaders to agree to any position at the negotiation table, and that is not democratic. And we stand to represent principle of democracy. So as the report from that meeting is out, we are evaluating the report, and we are going to go back to students that we derive our legitimacy from to make approval or rejection of that proposal. So whatever is going to happen will be determined by the responses we are going to get from students by the time we conduct referendum across levels, across departments, across faculties. And this is the basic thing that members of ASU do when they go on strike. They don't agree at the negotiation table, they take it back to their members, and they do congresses across universities where they vote for approval or rejection of such proposal. So we are going to adopt that same principle of democracy by going back to students of University of Lagos for them to see whether a mere slash of 10,000 naira for new students or 20,000 naira for returning students is enough demand that they are making from the management. So if they say that, yes, that is what they want, then we agree to that. If they disagree with that, then we continue with the struggle, because we stand to derive our legitimacy from the students of University of Lagos. And whatever they say is what we are going to stand by and uphold.
Philip Olatinwo, thank you so much for clarifying things and, of course, giving us more insight into the development regarding the tuition fee hike. Spokesperson, Student Solidarity Group Against Fee Hike, thank you so much for your time with us.
Thank you for having me.